please rise for flag pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Attendance. We are missing our student rep, Ryder, and we are missing Kurt Johnson and Dina. And I'm sorry, Kurt, did you say that Dina was coming in late? Okay. Number 2, recognition of visitors in open forum. Do we have any? Okay. Number 3, I need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Pamela. Tim, I'm sorry. Seconded.
Pamela moved it, I said.
Okay. And seconded by Kim. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion passes. Number 4, reports and information items, fiscal year 24 audit report.
I'll start this, kick it over to Heidi, and then Heidi will introduce our speaker. But our auditing firm will give the report now, and it will be an action item later on in your agenda. It's the first action item. Ryan does have a deadline with another school district, so he's doing this virtually. So he's got to be, I think, done by 10 to 6 or somewhere in there, I think was the time frame that we sort of talked. But if we need more time, we can figure out a different way. But that's ground, the playing field, and then I'll kick it over to Heidi.
Sounds good. Good evening, everybody. As Kurt had mentioned, Ryan Schmidt from Schlenner, Wenner and Company is the audit firm and the senior lead on our fiscal year 24 audit. He'll go through the presentation, certainly mark down any questions you might have, and he or I can answer them at the end of the presentation. This is a new firm to the district. If you recall, we went out for a request for proposals about a year ago, vetted 3 different firms, were priorly supported by Bergen KDV for the past several years, now new with Schlenner Wenner, and I just want to publicly thank Ryan and his team, and also the district office staff and anyone else that was involved in getting this audit off the ground and eventually completed. It was a great experience, some learning involved, and some opportunities to work differently and better. And from there, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Sounds good. Thank you, Heidi. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you for allowing me to do this virtually this year. I wanted to be there in person, and then just the way it worked out with our schedules, like they said, I'm actually at another district right now. I'm in their conference room, and I'm going to do this presentation and then hop over to another one. So just appreciate the flexibility here. So anyway, I'm sharing my screen. I'm walking us through a PowerPoint presentation to kind of summarize the results of the audit this year. You should also have the full audited financial statements and the report to members of governance, the PDFs that we issued, but this is just going to walk us through the high-level results of the audit. So, moving into the first page, I always like to start out with a little bit of a reminder of what exactly it is we do during an audit, what's the purpose of an audit. Just at a really high level, an audit consists of us obtaining your financial records and information from throughout the past year, FY24, and we perform various procedures over this information as we've kind of listed out here. So a lot of inquiries with people in the district, a lot of analytics where we develop expectations for what your revenue and expense activity might be based on the budget or based on prior year trends. And then lots of detailed testing and sampling procedures, looking at invoices and bank statements and reports from the state. All of these things support the transactions that are in your accounting system, because that's what comes together to make up the numbers and the information that's in the financial statements. So what we've given you this year based on all these procedures is what's called an unmodified opinion. So that is a clean opinion, and that's the best you can achieve. So in a nutshell, you got the clean opinion. We have a few other things that we always need to communicate as well based on basically how the audit went. So If there were any difficulties during the audit, or if we saw any unusual transactions or anything abnormal that we felt we needed to communicate to you, this is where we would tell you about it. But actually, I think the audit went very smoothly. You know, it was our first year auditing the district, which always takes a little bit of extra time getting to know you and figuring out your processes and everything for the first time. But I'd say, even with it being the first year auditing the district, I think things went quite well. So yeah, other than that, nothing here to really note on this page. The next page here, as part of the audit process, we always look at your internal controls and your processes and procedures that are behind the numbers. So one of the items that is usually, with most of our clients, a pretty significant part of the audit is audit adjustments. So a lot of the districts we work with, we need to give a finding of some sort saying that, okay, during the audit process, we helped make these corrections so that we could still give you a clean opinion. You know, we come across errors, we help correct them. Well, at your district, I'm happy to say that that wasn't really the case. You know, we really didn't have much for significant adjustments. Things were pretty clean, actually very clean, the way that they were given to us, which is a good indication for you that the information and the numbers that you're seeing throughout the year are likely very accurate. So that's good to see. And then the other item that we do have noted on the right-hand side of the screen here, you're probably familiar with this from prior years. This relates to a lack of segregation of duties. So just looking at the size of the district and how many people are involved with the different accounting processes, and how certain people basically have access to the entire accounting system. This is something that we have to put in the report and make you aware that there are people who have access to basically the entire accounting system. Next page, as part of the audit, we also have to look at your compliance with Minnesota statutes. So the state actually gives us checklists related to each one of these areas that are listed out here. And we have to look at various transactions and see if you complied with all the different items on the checklist. So it goes over, you know, how did you go about contracting and bidding, and where are you keeping your cash and investments, and if there were any conflicts of interest, how did you handle that, etc. And we do have two items to note this year, neither of which I would consider to be extremely significant, but they were on the checklist, so here they are. They're in the report. So the first of them relates to unclaimed property, which specifically is old outstanding checks. So basically, you tried to pay a vendor or someone, you owed them money, you paid them a check, and the check never got cashed by them, and it's just been outstanding for more than 3 years. And when it gets to be more than 3 years, then technically there's a reporting process you're supposed to follow with the state, and it could result in you even remitting those funds to the state. And I honestly don't know where the process goes from there. But that was one item. We're not talking about big amounts of money here, but that's one of the items we noticed. The other item here relates to competing quotes for purchases. So the general rule is that when you're making a purchase that's over $25,000, you're supposed to solicit quotes from at least 2 vendors, just to show basically that the due diligence is being done for those purchases. So there were a couple purchases during the year where it looked like that hadn't happened, and you know, I'm sure there were reasons as far as, you know, vendor familiarity with you know, the maybe compatibility with the systems that you're working on, or whatever the reason might be. But just to show that due diligence, even if you don't go with the lowest quote, the requirement is still there to document that you did get more than one. All right, move on to the next section, the single audit. So since your district receives more than $750,000 of federal funding each year, you have to have what's called a single audit, which is basically where we look at those federal programs through which you received funding, and we have to test your compliance with those programs. So did you spend the money the ways that you're supposed to, and what kind of reporting did you do? Did you comply with that? So on and so forth. As you can see, no findings this year. Everything was clean and looked the way that it should be. All right, with that, we'll move into the numbers a little bit here. The first thing I always like to do before jumping into the numbers is take a look at enrollment. since there's oftentimes such a strong correlation between the funding you receive and your enrollment. And as you can see, your enrollment has been really steady over the past 5 years here, very steady from last year to this year. So that's good to see. Next page here, we'll look at the general fund and spend a few slides focusing on there. Pretty big picture. Really big picture here, looking at the general fund for starters. 2020 through 2024, excuse me, and then the 2024 budget as well. Revenues in the blue, expenditures in the red, and then your fund balance at the end of each year in the green. So really big picture, revenues exceeded budget by about $471,000 for the year. Expenditures also exceeded budget by about $109,000. So overall, you had budgeted for an increase of just over $1 million for the year, and your actual increase in fund balance was about $1.4 million. Now the next couple pages take those same revenues and expenditures and breaks it down into greater detail here. So here we have 2024, the actual results in the red, and the 2024 budget in the green, and then also the prior year on there as well. So this first page looks at revenues in a little greater detail, and then the next page looks at those same expenditures broken out in greater detail. So as you can see, the vast majority of your funding does come from state sources. And here you were very close to budget. Really, across the board, you were very close to budget. The only thing that really stands out here as a change would be the increase from the prior year in the amount of state funding you received. And it looked like this was largely driven by additional compensatory aid that came through during the year, which we've kind of seen across the board with a lot of the schools we work with, and then also additional special education funding as well. Next page, we have the same layout, but looking at the general fund expenditures, once again broken down into several different categories. So here we have regular instruction as the largest category for your expenses as expected. And here you were about $223,000 under budget, but up a bit compared to the prior year. And special education, second largest expense category. Here you were over budget approximately $673,000, and this is the driver for some of that additional special ed aid that I talked about on the previous page. But other than that, not a whole lot to point out here. Things were pretty close to budget. All right, so still on just the general fund here. This next slide looks at your fund balance at the end of the year, specifically the unassigned portion of your fund balance as a percentage of your annual budgeted expenditures. So you actually have a policy in place to maintain this ratio at about 15% of your annual budgeted expenditures. And as you can see, you've been very, very consistent over the last 4 years. Actually had a slight increase this year up to about 15.6%. So basically what this is telling me is that even as the district's expenses are growing and the district is growing, there's been a corresponding growth in the fund balance. And it's good to see such a steady trend in this ratio, particularly considering that you haven't had an operating referendum at the district. So it's good to see that consistency there. All right, with that, we'll move away from the general fund and take a quick look at each one of your other funds here. Here we have your debt service fund. Not a whole lot to talk about here. You know, the activity is pretty typical. You've got your revenues coming in from property taxes and a bit of state aid, and then basically just your debt, principal, and interest payments. Overall, an increase in fund balance here of about $84,000 for the year. And this just shows the history of the cash balance in that debt service fund over the past 5 years. Not too much fluctuation. I believe you had a refunding bond. I'm guessing that's what happened here back in 2021. Issued a new bond, and then that cash got used to pay off the old debt right away. So it held pretty steady. Next page, here we have your food service fund and community service fund. Food service fund, Activity here increased a little bit, particularly on the revenue side. With the additional state funding for meals this past year, your revenues were up about $428,000 compared to the prior year. Expenditures here were up about $98,000. So overall, an increase in your food service fund of about $230,000 for the year. And your community service fund, both the revenue and the expense activity were pretty consistent with the prior year. Next page shows the 5-year cash trend in both of those funds. So you can see food service did have a bit of a bump this year, increased about $209,000 to a balance of $949,000. And your community service fund also increased about $100,000 to a balance of $511,000. Okay, so that does it for each one of the individual funds of the district. The next few slides, I like to wrap all of those funds together and look at the district as a whole. So if you're looking through the financial statements, this is the information that's known as the government-wide or the district-wide financial statements. So here we also have long-term items included like capital assets and long-term debt, some of those balances that aren't included in the fund level financial statements. So the first page here, looking at the district-wide assets with those long-term capital assets included, you can see your assets increased just slightly overall compared to the prior year. The biggest shift was really just a bit of a change between the current assets, your cash, your receivables, etc. A little bit more of that on hand at the end of FY24 than what you had at the end of 2023. Next page, same layout, but looking at liabilities. For just a moment here, ignore the green bar, pretend the green portion's not even there. Looking at everything except the green, you can see that overall your liabilities did drop off a bit, and it's mostly just due to the payments that you've made on your outstanding debt throughout the year. The reason that I say ignore the green bar is because that is your net pension liability. So just as a brief reminder on what this net pension liability is, basically this is your proportionate share of the liabilities that are calculated by TRA and PERA every year. You know, they have an actuarial study, they project their statewide plan deficits, and they break out a small piece of that. You know, small is a relative term, but a piece of it, and they have each district put it on their books as a liability. You couldn't pay it off even if you wanted to. So because of that, on this next slide here, I like to exclude that pension activity, exclude those pension balances, and look at a comparison between your assets from 2 slides ago versus your liabilities on the last slide, and then look at that on a net basis. This is the green bar is the net between those two on a 3-year trend. You can see you've had a trend of slight increases for the past couple of years looking at things on a net basis. And then I just have a slide on here showing your debt over the past few years. You can see you've been making payments on your debt and the overall balance has been decreasing, decreased about $2.4 million during FY24. And then I do have just one extra slide that I've been throwing on to the end this year, just as a little bit of a heads up about a new accounting standard that's coming down the pipe for next year. You know, the Accounting Standards Board, they like to keep putting out new standards each year, and this one relates to compensated absences. So long story short, the impact here is, you know, well, compensated absences is a fancy way of saying accrued vacation, accrued sick leave, PTO, whatever sort of paid time employees are accumulating. Under this new standard, even if that paid time isn't paid out when an employee leaves, the district still needs to carry a balance for it as a liability. So if there's accrued PTO, accrued vacation, et cetera, that's carried forward by employees at the end of the year, then a calculation needs to be performed to record that as a liability. And I think the district is mostly doing this already. So it probably won't have a huge impact on your district. But it could have a little bit of an impact once we dive into the standard a little deeper and look at all your policies. Any questions?
Madam Chair. Yeah. Just a quick question on our couple fund balances in food service and community ed. Are we running any risk of being too high in either of those at this point?
Do you want to take?
You know, it's in my opinion, it's a matter of opinion. I don't think there's a risk of being too high. You know, I think a little bit of it depends on maybe what your future plans are in either one of those funds, if you're going to need the cash reserves for anything. But Heidi, I mean, I don't know if you know anything that I don't, but I'm not aware of there being any detriment, you know, directly by having a large fund balance in those funds.
So our district is accustomed to the food service fund balance increasing year over year. There's a couple of variables and the reasons for that. The overall increase in state funding for free meals for all students, so certainly injected more funds into the district. The high level awareness and accountability to the operations of the food service department based on the leadership of our food service director, Patty Buell, and the staffing there to mitigate and reduce, if any, expenses in those areas, which leads to the ever-growing fund balance. The challenges of spending it down are mostly restrictive based on state statute.
Yep.
We do and have had to provide annual spend down, I guess, plans to the state every year. They have recently increased what was before COVID 3 months of operating expense to now 6 months. I anticipate that will go back to 3 months in the next year or so. As it stands right now, 6 months is about $400,000 to $500,000. So again, pushing that $1 million threshold, we're about double that. Will the funds ever be taken away? I can't say for sure, but I doubt it. As I have said, we have been working with the state for the last, as long as I've been here, 9 years on a spend down plan. We do have some more flexibility with the recent legislative changes of allowing the food service fund to pay for lunch tables. So we did purchase and expend some funds for that in the current fiscal year. To answer your question, long story short, no on the food service fund. Community service fund, I don't believe we're anywhere near a fund balance that would require that. Again, the financial astuteness and accountability by our community ed director and her team and the work that they do, that fund balance has remained consistent, which is, I feel, an important factor. And the fact that the community ed program is solely, for the majority of its funding, fee-based program, and so having that fund balance is a necessity. As far as what the percentage is, Joelle, do you know what that would be if we were ever in an area where the state would recoup those funds? I know it's been many, many years where that has been addressed, but
I almost think there isn't
a
restriction anymore. It used to be, but I think they've taken it away.
It was ECFE before, and that's where we had it 10 years ago. But I don't, maybe the state's taken a lot of the fines off some of those, but I just was curious.
no, very good questions. Overall,
Yeah.
you know, important to have a fund balance. To what level is opinion in some cases.
Ryan, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just going to say that I've never seen a district who's had to pay anything back, but not to say that it couldn't happen. So I think it's more likely they would work with you to create some sort of spend down plan to be able to use those funds.
Can I make 2 comments? First comment, community service fund, if you remember, is actually 3 years ago, we were $60,000 in debt. in community ed, and then there's a little less in debt and a little less in debt, so I do have to acknowledge Joelle and her team there. And food service fund, I think Patty is providing quality food, her staffing levels are good, and she keeps expanding. We, have now box lunch at Eagle View, which is over 100 students participating every day, so they're still looking for ways to spend it and serve our kids and not just sit on the money as well.
Madam Chair. I just want to follow up. I think the fund balance is a positive thing. I just know if the state's going to fine us, that's a negative thing. So I just, because we've had this issue before on audits, you know, and the laws have changed, which is good to hear. No one else?
Do you have a question, Pamela? I have two other things, if you don't mind. I think our staff would say the thoroughness of Schlenner and Wenner was impressive this year. Which is good. I think the good thing that they can do is ask questions and keep diving in and keep responding. So it was a longer audit process, and again, I wasn't in the everyday details, but the thoroughness of them was appreciated, and I feel good about that. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, if anybody has any questions after the fact, you can certainly feel free to reach out and give me a call, shoot me an email, either way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready to go on?
Yeah, just a reminder for the board and people here, we're gonna go through our agenda. At 6 o'clock is our truth and taxation hearing, so no matter where we are in the agenda, we will stop. We will move over to Heidi's truth and taxation, give anybody in the public ability to ask questions or comments or whatever they need, and then we'll reconvene the meeting if we have items left.
Okay, B, facilities referendum planning update.
I just wanted to share with you, from our last meeting, we did talk about potential ballot questions, and just wanted to see if I can pull up in full draft mode. Question one, then, based upon our election attorney advice, is the terminology in front of you, including acquisition and betterment of school sites. I know there was a question of all, and she said based upon state statute, she would recommend leaving that. Oh, but it does include all of our school sites. Facilities, improvements of safety and security, which we talked about, new career, technology, and trade spaces, so that word was added based upon the feedback. And then the last bit, and various building capital maintenance projects. She thought the word capital should stay in there based upon some state statutes and some of those language. So nothing changed in question two, but that was based upon your recommended changes, what our election attorney said would be best.
Madam Chair. Pamela, I think it reads much more clear, and I appreciate the changes.
Anything else?
Madam Chair.
Dina?
I'm surprised that you left various in, because that's such an ambiguous term that somebody could point to and say, well, you know, what are these various buildings? If you just say it as building, you know, it's not as definitive, but various isn't either.
If you don't mind, I agree with you, and I think that's, if this board does decide to go out for an election, that's what we need to communicate, is what exactly is those details behind the various building maintenance items.
Okay. Anyone else?
So again, to make sure we're all on the same page, again, January 6th is our next meeting, organizational meeting, and this would be on the agenda to actually call for an election in April.
Did you want to go over anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, all right. C, banking service RFP.
Would you like me to provide an update on that? Okay. In November, the district published a request for banking services proposal. We received 2 proposals. one from Bremer and one from First National Bank. We currently are in banking partnership with Bremer at this time. We were provided very detailed and helpful information from both organizations. We met and interviewed both institutions. We, at this time, have decided, based on potential changes in budget, if any, the opportunity for consideration of a bond, and some factors in regards to either institution or both having some unknowns at the time. For example, Bremer Bank is proposed to be purchased by Old National Bank. Those are continuing conversations that are ongoing. We don't know what that transition will look like. And First National Bank has some, what I would consider important operational products and or services that we currently have with Bremer that First National Bank is starting to implement, that we feel it's a good point to pause before making a consideration on which financial institution, knowing that we have some variables on both sides, and then relook at this same consideration in about a year. Any questions?
I'm assuming obviously everything is currently functioning just fine with Bremer, the relationship's good, this was just part of our normal process anyways, so
Correct.
a hold really creates no issues.
Correct. In fact, a hold actually is beneficial for not only the district, but financial institutions in total, with the time and effort and in some cases financial expenses to change banks, has some components of it that would put us in a position in the next 6 months that we might not have the time, full time to devote to it, given what might happen, if anything, with a future bond. In addition to, we have a lot of systems in place with our current financial institution that changing at this time could cause some undue hardship in the operations of our district office. And so wanting to be mindful of that, but also feel like we're making the right decision with the right financial institution, with the right products and services that we need.
Madam Chair.
Kim.
Just a point of clarification for the RFP. Remind me, is this a new policy that we go out every 3 years? Or why was it put out?
I can take that. It was actually put out because of this board. I think 3 or 4 years ago when I got on, you retained me as superintendent, I think you challenged me on why are we with Bremer and not with somebody else? And we said, well, let's develop an RFP process, not just for banking, but for auditing services, which we did before. We did copying machines a year before, and there's like milk is every single year, that's state statute, and bread is every single year. But there's a couple of those other ones that we don't have to, but we have a schedule set up. So we're going out for banking services every 5 years is what we said.
Okay.
And we decided this time frame because if we were to change, then at your organizational meeting, it's one of those, depositories and banks that you would highlight and noted it in January. But since it's not going to be a change, we'll keep this.
And remind me, did we adopt a policy with that recommendation?
We
or
did
just,
not.
Okay, so that's just the general, was the bank is a 5-year rotation.
Yes.
And in theory, it would be next year again, another RFP would be put out.
I think we're going back to our 2 that submitted this year
Oh, okay.
is our.
That's a good question.
Okay.
We have all of the information, and out of, I guess, respect for institutions and the district, the fact that they've put in a lot of time and effort, as did we, to go out for the proposal and for them to provide information. We feel like we have enough information. We just want to ensure that any of the changes with our current institution and the implementation of products and services that we would need if we were to make a change, that they have time to do that.
Anyone else?
Thank you. Is there anyone on for student council report?
Ryder's not here. he was actually shopping for families in need for Christmas gifts. So, but he did say one item he wanted to report, they're planning for snow days week, which is in February.
Move on, E, superintendent report.
A couple items. I want to thank Aaron Nelson, our high school principal, who has done a tremendous amount of work on PSEO, where students that are Pequot Lakes high school students might take classes at a different institution, or might take classes with our teachers in our building and receive college credit. So done a lot of work, and I think the focus has been on still ensuring that our students have access to as many courses and as many credits as possible, and yet recapturing some funds. So I want to give him credit for that. The cost containment update, again, we were able to reduce a bus route, which will have some actualized savings, a little in gas, but then of course in a driver as well. We continue to monitor teachers on call expenses month over month per building, and then monitor any staffing changes that we make. Career fair was last Wednesday, and which was put on. Joanna O'Neill, our career counseling advisor, and Aaron Nelson put forth a great event with about 55 businesses that our students were able to visit with and be able to interact with people. And so thank you to our businesses who donated that time. And then our sophomores, juniors, and seniors spent some time visiting with them. It's concert season. We had the 2nd and 3rd grade concert last week. We do have a choir concert tonight after this board meeting, or a band concert tonight. If you're looking for something to do, you're welcome to attend that. It starts at 6 o'clock. And then last but not least, this is our board chair's last meeting, Susan Matheson Young. So want to thank you for your commitment and, sometimes all the work behind the scenes that nobody sees. So I know this is usually a thankless job for board members who just come to meetings, and but I do want to thank you for your time, and on behalf of the district, we'll get you, Bill.
Oh, thank you. It's all fun and games.
That's all fun.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think on behalf of the board members, I know Kurt's not here, so I will speak briefly on behalf of Kurt. And others, yeah, but I mean, I know Kurt and I have worked with you the entire time. You've been on the board, and the rest of us who have gotten to work with you, but I don't think everybody sees the amount of time and meetings, Monday nights, other days that go into this job, and I just want to thank you on behalf of myself being a taxpayer, for serving our community and taking time to serve our kids in our school district, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank the current board, wish the new board luck next year, oh my goodness. And, especially thanks to the students, the staff, and I just really appreciate being able to work with the students and the staff and the community members of District 186. And like I said, I've been on this for a while, since 2013, and I just wish everybody luck next year. Thank you.
I'll take any questions people have for my report, but that's all that I have.
Okay, any questions?
Yes. Is there gonna be a bigger update on PSEO in the future too, at a future board member?
Yes, we're hoping January.
Okay.
Anything else?
Just for other board members, because Pamela and I did have some communication, because I said, we're gonna be able to offer more here at school and yet save money for our district. And I think Pamela's, how does that work? So I think, yes, there are many details behind some of those numbers that Mr. Nelson can get into.
Okay, we'll move on. Number 5, need a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented.
So, second.
I don't know why I didn't know your name. Moved by Amy, seconded by Kim. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion passes. Number 6, truth in taxation, public meeting at 6 o'clock. It is 6 o'clock.
No,
isn't
we
it?
got 6 minutes.
Oh, man, should we keep going then? Is that?
Keep going,
Okay.
yep.
Number 7, action items. I need a motion to accept the fiscal year 24 audit report as presented.
So moved.
Second. Was that Kim?
Again, I could.
Kim and Ross?
Ross,
and
yeah.
Kim.
Moved by Ross, seconded by Kim. I don't know why when I look down, I can't
You got the bell and it was
understand
like
anybody.
just-
I'm done, I'm done. Okay, moved by Ross, seconded by Kim. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? No discussion, we'll proceed with a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. I need a motion to certify the final.
Actually, I think
yeah,
what's
I need-
best is,
Wait,
because, yeah, there might be public input that would make you change it, so we should skip
Oh,
the
sure.
and come back to it after.
sounds good.
which would be
Go to
best.
RAP
Seven.
strategies?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I need a motion to approve the agreement with RAP strategies for strategic counsel and communication services effective through April 30th, 2025 as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Pamela,
Second.
seconded by Ross. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Kim.
So just a couple questions, because I think one concern I have, Mr. Stumpf, is obviously the board hasn't decided if we're
Mhm.
moving forward, so feels just a touch, like, I get the intent here, but I don't see what is the clause to get out of this contract? Cause maybe I'm missing it, which is
Yep.
possible.
It's in number 3, I can pull it up.
Okay,
And
like I said, I probably read it, but.
So, again, this is basically then for December, and then if this board decides to
there's
go
the word.
through in
I
January,
see it now,
Yep.
the if.
Yep.
Sorry.
and I would agree, we
I
don't
was
wanna be
looking for a
encumbered
term.
if
I was
if
looking
the
for
board. Yep.
terminology for cancellation. Okay, thank you.
And I'll say, we've had multiple meetings recently, in preparation of getting organizing materials together and starting to come up with a communications plan.
Any other discussion? No further discussion, we'll proceed with a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion passes. I need a I'm sorry, I need and yeah, I am done. I need a motion to adopt the resolution accepting donations as presented.
So moved. Second.
Who do we want?
Do you want me to read? Okay,
Please, yep,
Okay.
okay, great.
I'll just read through these quickly. We had the Patriot Activities Club for $852 for National Honor Society. Five Wings Arts Council is $10,000 for GLAPA. Patriot Athletic Club for the volleyball account, $1,385 for the girls volleyball charter buses. Rich Spitzka for $145.43 for boys basketball program. Pequot Lakes PTA for $490.73 for the 6th grade field trip busing to Ski Gull. Those are our district accounts. Student activity fund accounts, Robert C. Porter, $100 girls tennis. James Beckman, $10 girls tennis. Mid-Minnesota Federal Credit Union, $1,000 dance team equipment. Ideal Community Service Organization, $1,500 for dance team uniforms. Pequot Tool and Manufacturing, $500 for dance team uniforms. For another $3,110 for our student activity fund accounts. And we thank all of our donors in December.
Thank you very much. Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Kim?
Aye.
Kurt is absent. Pamela?
Aye.
I vote aye. Dina?
Aye.
Ross?
Aye.
And Amy? Aye. Motion passes. Should we finish up? or do you-
Yeah, well, let's go, we can do one more, the announcements and meeting dates.
Announcements and meeting dates. Monday, January 6th, 6:00 p.m., the organizational regular meeting. And to draft 2025 meeting schedule review and discussion.
So, yeah, a couple things, it's actually 5 o'clock, it got printed off wrong, I think, before, but it's
Oh, I
scheduled
see.
for 5 o'clock for some reason, for the school board meeting. I did share this with Mariah tonight as she takes over, in her new position on January 6th at our organizational meeting. But again, you can discuss the times, if you wanna stay with the 6 o'clock, if you wanna go a little earlier, if you wanna go a little later, so that's up for discussion. And again, our typical flow has been, first Monday is a work session, third Monday is a regular board meeting. Of course, when you get into January and Martin Luther King Jr. Day is the third Monday, so we back that up to the 27th, and same thing in February, I believe it's President's Day, we back that up to the 24th. We could go the second, the second Monday if that was a big deal. So just want to prepare Mariah, the rest of you for that discussion, because we need to approve a calendar or something on January 6th.
Madam Chair, Pamela, do we know why it was at 5 o'clock? Was that just?
I don't know. I have no idea why it was like that. Should we put it back at 6?
It seems like if they're all at 6, it would make sense that we do 6, because there's nobody that can figure out the reason why we're at 5.
Yeah, I would.
That would. So we want Monday, January 6th meeting at 6 o'clock.
I just think for people
Yeah, I'm not sure.
remembering, I
I'm
think
not sure.
last year it was changed, or 2 years ago, and it was like a very strange time.
As far as the February dates, I appreciate pushing it back, the 3rd and the 24th, otherwise I wouldn't be missing a meeting, so it works.
And I think we were probably
Yep.
right at 6 o'clock.
Should we adjourn first, or we?
I think we can just go back to the agenda.
Okay. So we're on to truth and taxation.
Alright. Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, I am Heidi Hagan, the Finance Director for the Pequot Lakes Public School District. Tonight is the required truth and taxation presentation that I will be going through this evening. I will allow for the statute, and I will allow for public comment at the end of the presentation. So the next slide is the agenda. Tonight's agenda includes different factors affecting our proposed property tax considerations, which will be addressed in the presentation going forward. I talked a little bit about the review of meeting requirements, state statute, that it takes place on or after 6 p.m., that we review the current fiscal year budget, and we also further define the proposed tax levy, and that we allow for public comment. And I pretty much just went over that same slide. So Minnesota school funding in of itself is unique. Overall, public school districts are funded by a variety of different organizations, mainly the federal government, the state government, local fees and local taxpayers, taxes collected through property taxes, with the state of Minnesota being our largest funding source. I provide this slide every year. It changes just a little bit, unfortunately in the wrong direction. State funding, again, as I had mentioned, the majority of our funding, upwards over 80%, comes from the state basic general ed formula, and it hasn't kept up with the rate of inflation over the last 20 years, specifically on this graph. You can see the dark blue line is the overall formula allowance increase if it were to be kept up with the overall rate of inflation, and then the actual formula allowances in the green line, which is currently at $7,281 per pupil, and then the gap in between there of just under $1,400 is often being mitigated by local taxpayer levies. And so working to reduce that gap in hopes that funding will be brought up to the cost of current inflation or better. Our fiscal year 25 budget review will consider a variety, or I guess a few different funds. We are statutorily required to account for our different revenues and expenses based on what we call fund accounting. We have currently 5 different funds, 4 of which we use and one that we're just starting to use, but the general fund, food service fund, community service fund, the building construction fund, which is coming into play with our indoor air quality bond, and any future considerations for bonds, and then our debt service fund. And those with the asterisk next to them have a levy component. This is the overview of our current fiscal year 25 budget. Again, you can see the 5 different funds, revenues, expenditures, and the projected excess or deficit. This was the original budget that the board approved in June of this past summer. We are currently working on a budget revision for the board to consider here in the next coming months. This is a graphical representation of the revenues that we receive by source, meaning federal, state, local, and other. The majority, as you can see in the darkest blue shade, is our state aid, which, as mentioned, accounts for about 80% of our total funding. Next is our levy, which is about 12%. Federal is about 6%, and all other is the remainder. Similar graphical representation, but this is expenditures for the fiscal year FY25, and this is based on programs. So salaries, wages, and benefits are about 75% of the total slice of the pie, if you will. So the darker shaded versions of the pie chart. Fees for service are the next. Supplies, capital, and other are the smaller parts of that. This slide represents the district's tax levy timeline. So it spans over the course of 3 years, meaning that in the summer, the school district is provided with information from the state on property tax calculations. That's what we call the preliminary levy. Statute requires that the board certify preliminary levy in September of every year. If there are any elections, those take place in November for specifically bonds or other types of levy funding. Between November 25th and December 30th, we're required to hold this presentation. And then taxes are collected in the calendar year of 2025 for revenue that we would then account for in fiscal year 27.
26 or 27?
The levy that the board is approving tonight will be revenue for fiscal year 27. Local property tax levies are a component of a variety of different formulas driven by the total number of students we serve, any specific eligible expenditure types, the population of the district, the voter authorization, whether the levies are voter approved or board approved or otherwise, and district-wide property valuation. So all of those components go into the total district levy funding and how that correlates to our taxpayers' taxes for the school district. Calculating your property taxes isn't easy. There's 3 key variables. So property taxpayers' estimated property values, those are set by the county assessor based on the property classification. There's a variety of different property classifications and rates that are established by our state legislature, and the tax levy, which is based on taxing jurisdictions. So us as a school, city, county, townships. And so all of that put together then results in property taxes due specifically for each property and taxpayer, and no one in particular is equal. There's 2 types of property tax valuations. This would be net tax capacity and referendum market value. The 2 different types means that different property owners or types of property are taxed. So the net tax capacity takes into account most all property types across the entire district, and so those taxes are spread out amongst more individuals and or properties, whereas referendum market value excludes ag land, and seasonal rec properties. And so any levies that are referendum market value calculated, it's not taking into account those two specific classifications. This is a slide that provides some historical data on both the referendum market valuation and the net tax capacity. So depending on the type of property, the valuation can be of one of those two types. And over the years, the property valuations in both categories have consistently gone up year over year. Hence why a lot of our property tax owners are seeing increases in their overall taxes. Some has to do with the increase in their properties. You can see most notably the 23 and 24 pay years were relatively higher than previous years, and now estimated pay for this fiscal year has come down considerably, hoping that that means property values have stabilized. I talked a little bit about this in a prior slide, but how does the property taxes in the district get allocated or spread out? So they don't rise uniformly or decrease uniformly. Again, it depends on the type of property, the type of valuation, and the classification. But it is spread out that if the levy funds would shift to those that have higher valuations, classifications, and or rates to those that have less. So higher increase equals larger piece of the tax levy that the district taxpayer would pay. Going a little bit further, this depicts how the total tax levy for the school district payable in 2025 is allocated out between those two property types. As I had mentioned, net tax capacity, which is just over 5.1 million of the total levy, is spread out on all or most properties in the district, whereas a smaller portion, about 1.7 million, is only spread out amongst everyone but ag and seasonal rec. So this shows that the majority of the school district's tax levy is spread out across all properties and taxpayers within the district. This breaks down the total proposed levy overview, breaks it down into the three different funds. So the general fund receives tax levy, the community service fund, and the debt service fund. All of these different categories are based on some of those variables that I had mentioned in previous slides. Of course, enrollment impacts it, the types of properties, the values of those properties, and any legislative calculations or formula changes. Overall, the total property tax levy for the school district, including all three of those funds, is increasing about 500,000 from the previous tax levy year, or about 8.15%. The majority of that comes in the debt service fund, most specifically the recent long-term facilities maintenance bond for our indoor air quality project. This chart splits out the different types of categories of the levy and voter authorization, whether it's board or taxpayer voted, or statutorily levy that the school district can levy for. Overall, this is an example of a residential home value of $400,000 in our district. The total estimated school tax would be $534. Of that $534, $107 of that is categorical, meaning if we had an operating referendum, we don't have that. Capital projects levy, we don't have that. We do levy for long-term facilities maintenance. We do levy for community ed. We do levy for career and technical education. And we don't have a current lease that we levy for. So that's $107 of that $534. Board-approved debt is $26 of the total. And that would be the long-term facilities maintenance bond that was just authorized. Voter approved is $163 of the total. Eligible for board approval, so this would be local optional equity and transition, is about $238 of that total. and we don't have an operating number. This is an example of what a district taxpayer might see on their tax statement based on a 2.5% increase in valuation for residential and commercial, and about a 3.8% increase in A classification. Overall, we're ranging annually of anywhere between 20, the highest value of a commercial property at $130 increase for the year to the lowest, which would be around residential home value of $250 or $9 annually. This is a resource for our taxpayers to be aware of and to be informed on how and when, if you have questions on your tax statements. So in March of 2024, and now we're thinking ahead, think about March of 2025, you will receive a preliminary valuation in your mail from the counties on the valuations and types of property you have. In the summer or spring or early summer, you would have the option to appeal if you felt your valuations were not correct. In November, you would receive a proposed property tax statement based on what the school district, the county, the city had preliminarily proposed. You would attend a truth and taxation hearing between the end of November and the end of December, and then we circle back and you receive your tax statement for taxes that you would pay. And so being mindful that March of any calendar year is when that ball starts rolling. This is an example of a tax statement showing the various organizations that levy for taxes and the overall proposed amount. So that previous slide is the valuation that you would get in March of any given year. This is on the back of that proposed valuation. You would have information on who to contact at your respective counties and how to appeal. Questions? As I had mentioned earlier, there are tax law changes that also impact levies for school districts and other municipalities. This current tax year, homestead market value exclusion is increasing, which is reducing taxes for residential homestead properties valued up to the $517,000 mark. And we have some agricultural homestead classifications that are increasing. So there used to be a limit of 2.150 million in payables 24. That's increasing to 3.5 million for taxes that are being paid in 2025. Overall, that will reduce taxes for landowners with greater than the 2.15 million in classified homestead property. So after all of that, the levy certification that the district is recommending would be to certify the amount of $6,862,100.72. This is equal to the preliminary levy that was voted and approved up to the maximum. And next slide. So now we have the opportunity for public comment and or questions. If we do have anyone that is interested in commenting, we ask that you state your name and keep it to between 2 and 3 minutes.
Theodore Johnson. My proposed taxes that went up 100% on one piece, and 4,400% on another. And 44.44% on another, 50% on another. Okay, that's what it is. So you wanna look at it, or?
I'm wondering what questions you might have, and then I can address
I wonder
the,
why it went up so damn much, it's supposed to go up 10%.
yeah, so my recommendation, and I hear you, it sounds like those are some large percentages, would be to contact the county, because they set the valuations and the rates.
You don't do nothing.
We don't have any authority to change or work with taxpayers on their valuations. That strictly comes from the county. The school district doesn't have any control over that. And at the bottom of, that form, there should be the county that your property is in, should be some contact information.
Well, it says here on the bottom, I'm supposed to talk to you.
That would be questions on the actual dollar amounts of the levy and what we're levying for, but that doesn't have, I don't have to do with the percentage increases or the amount of your property values. Those are from the county.
But I think let's do this, because you might have specific questions. Why don't we, after this meeting, we can sit with you tonight and go through that.
Say what?
We can sit with you tonight and go through that after this.
Okay.
Because there might be, yeah, some other things in play. So we'd absolutely do that for you.
All right.
Anybody else?
My name's Martin Lauer, and, you know, one question I would have is what increase in the budget do you have in the levies?
I want to catch him before.
What is the increase?
The increase is 500,000 total,
No percentage, I'm sorry.
and the percentage of the overall general fund budget, is that what you're asking? So let me just do the calculation. So our general fund budget is about 30 million, and the levy for the school district is going up about 500,000. So what is that? Less than 2%?
Okay, I think that, you know, I mean, I understand that when the property goes up, that you're meant to do that. But, I mean, I live in a one-bedroom, one and a half bathroom home. If I sold it, it would just be bulldozed. It went up 25% on the taxation rate. And the rate on the, I mean, 20% on the taxation rate. I've never really been opposed to taxation. However, 20% is not sustainable for a person in their 70s. I don't know what that guy's general question is. And we are also living in a district, in a region of the state that is basically overwhelmingly the voters have chosen representatives to flatten spending. The inflation rate is pegged at 2.5%, but I think the spending might be exceeding that. I guess I'm wondering what the ceiling is on these things. And I understand that, you know, I need to go to the county when I was unable to do that last year. And I did mean to go to it, so I am going to one tomorrow night. But I'm, you know, I'm just, you know, what, I think the representatives are in the same spot. I have actually served on school boards before in the past and was in that business for 4 decades. So I understand this stuff pretty well, but I also understand that you're part of a region within a system that is, I mean, if you're following the voting patterns, you're seeing that you know, raising cost is not tenable to, not me, to the population.
Right. Well, thank you for your comments. Speaking to if there's a ceiling on the school district levy in particular, there's a ceiling, meaning we have a limitation, so we can only levy based on the variables that go into calculating that levy, so state statute, enrollment.
Percentage is what I'm asking.
percentage increase.
percentage raise.
Yeah, and so that would be similar in that, you know, we can only levy for a certain amount in which the school district as a whole hasn't done anything within their control, with the exception of the $2 million indoor air quality long-term facilities maintenance bond that would have increased it based on their authorization. Everything else is outside of school district's control. So the number of students we serve, state legislation changes, I mean, we have to some impact partnering with legislation, but ultimately they make the decisions, and then property values. So those three components that highly drive the total levy that the school district is authorized to levy are outside of the control of school board and the district as a whole. So I don't know if that answered your question, or if you can maybe speak to it differently.
I'll speak to maybe two things. I think we are hearing, tax impact in the economy, so.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
We are hearing the issues with, taxation and the economy and people struggling. So you did leave out this slide as well, so I did wanna bring this up. Not that this is gonna make you feel better, but to put some perspective around it, when you look at neighboring districts and the average valuation of $400,000 and what people are paying in Pequot Lakes, which is $514, and the same evaluation in Brainerd, they're paying $1,000. Again, this isn't gonna make you feel excited because you're still gonna have to pay your money, but I think what I'm trying to communicate is that we are trying to do the best that we can, being the 10th lowest funded school district in the state of Minnesota. We rank 318.
No, I'm not arguing
out of
that,
328.
I'm not saying that, I've been in the same position you're in the
Yeah.
past. What I'm just saying is that in view of what you see taking place from voters statewide,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying I'm in favor of that at all, I think this needs to be a reality, that when people look at what they're spending money on, what happens. As to my own personal case or his case, those are two different things. I consider myself an extremely fortunate, blessed person, perhaps beyond anyone here or anyone you know. But the point is that, this is, I just, I think that these things should be taken into consideration of where you live and, what programs, then how they get looked at, that's all. And what are the percentages being looked, that's all. Thank you for your time and your volunteer efforts as well, large part.
Anything else?
Hi, I'm Donna Wingy. For me, just a point of information, I had an issue with the valuations, year before last, because my house took such a huge jump. My property taxes jumped $800 in 1 year, and I'm retired too, so, but what it was when I dug into it, and when it went to the city, went to the county, it was partially state pushed to the county, and what they did was, is they took and they evaluated old houses like mine, was built in '97, the same as a brand new house built the same size a mile down the road. And so that's what happened there. As far as the levy, my concern is the last year, the last time you had one, I went and I did some research, dug into some things and asked some questions. I understand, especially the middle high school, it's got maintenance items. And I understand, so does the elementary school. We understand there are things that are needed. There are things that are needed, like getting these kids back so that they're educated to go to trade schools or get into the trades, more so than the college end of it. There are things like that, I agree, and I'm willing to pay for them. But what I would like to see is a detail of where you came up with this, like technologies. What is that? How much is in there for this and that and the other thing? Curriculum. I would like to see the details so that I can make a true evaluation, because if there's things in there that the general round of taxpayers are against, many of us have ideas what those might be, I think that's where it gets cut back. And let's do the necessities, what we need to, because even when I go and I look at the test, the scoring reports for the kids, the product we're putting out, and taxpayers will do that, and they look at the money, when they see all this money countrywide being thrown against education, and we're not, the product we're getting out of the schools isn't improving on the same rate that the money's going up. I think, I would really like to see the absolute detail and look at it that way. But I know there's things we have to do. The school's gonna fall down if you don't do some certain things. I mean, you gotta keep the heat on, the boilers working, there's things that have to be done. But there's a lot of people who've been constrained over the last 4 years, really tight, gotten into debt, and I think we just need to keep it to the nitty-gritty, what's absolutely necessary. That's my take.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Is there anyone else? Board, do you have any questions?
I did think this slide was important, so I did pull it up.
Yes, thank you.
The comparison, when you look across districts.
Is that it? So we go back to number 7.
Yes.
Letter B. I need a motion to certify the final levy for 2024, payable 2025, in the amount of $6,862,172.
So moved.
Moved by Pamela, seconded by Kim. Is there any other discussion?
Madam Chair.
Kim.
Thank you for the presentation. I think every year, the thing that I think this levy gets very confusing because so much of our instructional dollars come from the state. So when the board doesn't have a lot of control over instructional dollars, I appreciate you walking through that because the nuance of this levy is so different from the majority of the money we get from the state. So, I appreciate the walkthrough and Mr. Stump, I appreciate you brought that one up as well because I think our district has tried really hard to keep our taxes on the lower end of our local and neighboring districts. So I appreciate the walkthrough.
Any discussion? No further discussion, we'll proceed with the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Madam Chair, it's a roll call vote.
Oh, I am so sorry, it wasn't on there.
Oh, never mind, it's just on my agenda.
Does it need to be a roll call?
I'm not sure, but it can't hurt.
Right.
Okay. All right, so roll call vote. Kim?
Aye.
Kurt is absent. Pamela?
Aye.
I vote aye. Dina?
Aye.
Ross?
Aye.
And Amy? Aye. Motion passes. I need a motion for adjournment. So moved. Moved by Amy. Seconded by Ross. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And motion passes. We are done at